Detroit, welcome officially to the PWHL. Takeover tours no more. And now you've got your own team. We'll talk about the expansion announcements, worst kept secret on the interwebs for the last handful of days. And then, of course, we have tied series across the semifinals. We're going to talk about the PWHL playoffs that, I mean, you called it last week, Rachel, right? Effectively, this is a goalie showcase. So we'll get into all of that. But first, again, welcome Detroit. Let's play that beautiful footage that we saw earlier today from the Detroit announcement.
Detroit, make some noise!
It's Hockey Town, baby. Come on.
It's Hockey Town.
We're Hockey Town.
There's no other place better than Detroit.
Hockey Town! Detroit deserves a PWHL team because the fans really show up.
The fans chanting, "We want a team."
We might get it.
We've broken attendance records in the past.
Feel the record breaking. Listen to that crowd. Everyone's very, very excited to be a part of history.
Detroit is a huge hockey community. We're all in it together.
If Detroit had a team, a lot of little girls would be able to see that playing hockey is something that's possible for them.
Pretty incredible to be here in Detroit and get to inspire the next generation.
I play hockey and I'm a girl, and it's special knowing there's other ones that are pro.
If Detroit had a team, we would be here all the time.
It's clear from the support that Detroit wants a team, so I think that in the next expansion, we really deserve one.
All right, there we go, Rachel. A lot of fans in that clip that will have to buy new jerseys, but I think they'll be happy about it since their hometown team or, hometown adjacent. We know that women's sports fans do travel well. Will have a team. So again, I do think that this wasn't a greatly kept secret. We kind of got inklings that there was going to be an announcement in Detroit on Wednesday, which is today, the day that we're recording, and we knew expansion was on the horizon. Now, we will talk a little bit about what we know about the expansion, air quotes, Rachel, draft, because there are some updates there. But let's just first talk about Detroit. Hockeyville, is that? I didn't know that was a thing. Hockey Town, okay. Oh, Hockeyville's something else. That's a Canadian,
That's
NHL
the
thing. Right.
Kraft Hockeyville rehab thing.
Gotcha. Okay. Hockey Town. I didn't know Detroit was Hockey Town.
Yep. It's been on their ice and in their branding for as far as I can remember. So
tells you how many Red Wings games I've watched in my life.
Original six team. That's part of why.
We also got to see again throughout the announcement and in the video that the Detroit team, to be named at a later date and time, I think we're probably right. Exactly. As per usual, it was out of necessity and a short timeline. And now apparently it's the culture of the PWHL, whatever, not my thing, but go off, do your thing. But this is going to be a team that their primary colors will be black and silver. And I guess I will now actually pay attention to the ice and the Hockey Town logo because they will be playing at Little Caesars Arena. This bid was led by the same sports and entertainment business arm of the Red Wings, the Tigers, and the operators of Little Caesars Arena. Takeaways about this or your thoughts overall, including that something I don't think we've ever gotten before, Rachel, is that we got confirmation in the announcement today that Ally will be brought on as a sponsor for this Detroit team.
Yeah, I think that part of it is good in some ways. Just it creates more of a, I think, foundation of stability, having a primary sponsor like that already in the can, obviously connected to the Red Wings organizations and the Ilitch family. I think that it is another kind of institution in Detroit, so that's good. I think the black and silver as the primary colors was really hard to suss out visually in the announcement and in the graphics, but I guess in person it'll look a little better. They also have red and white as highlight colors to kind of mirror the Red Wings a little bit. So
Right.
that's good.
I agree with you now, actually, that I'm looking at it. Because I read the announcement before I saw any of the video, and now I'm like, actually, so we're sure red's not a primary color?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. I also want to point out that, and others have pointed out as well, because this has been kind of a long-standing missing thing in women's hockey, is that the state of Michigan does not have any Division I women's hockey teams in it. And so in that presentation, you look at the kids they had involved, and there was like a U19, girls team involved. There's no college players that play in Michigan, and that, it's just one of those things that makes it more apparent. So hopefully University of Michigan, Michigan State,
something,
get it together,
right?
Together.
Not for lack of trying, right?
Yeah.
Not for lack of trying. We've seen, especially at Michigan, a club team, and there's been a lot of reporting about what have been some of the holdups there, and it's mostly institutional.
And I knew somebody that played for the Michigan club team in like the late 90s. Like it's been a long time.
Now we're up to 8 going into 9, and maybe another 3 teams added in the next handful of seasons. So that would be doubling up what the inaugural
or next season. We don't know, because they said any further expansion details and how Detroit is going to be integrated into the process, is forthcoming. It's always 2 to 3 weeks from now is always the standard answer.
Right. I think we need to start before I just get my heart rate elevated. We should define what 2 to 3 weeks is. So when I say 2 to 3 weeks, this is what I mean. When the PWHL says 2 to 3 weeks, this is what they maybe kind of sort of mean.
Yeah. Well, I think they're starting to change the language to in the coming weeks, because that could be anything.
Truly. So yes, I mean, a little tongue in cheek, and also like timelines are not, that's not one of the things yet that the PWHL has perfected. But again, marketing seems to be one of them. I think that this seemed like the right market to go with, and I don't think it was a huge surprise. Again, they had the most PWHL tours, had very successful stops in Detroit. Now, with this announcement, or I should really say prior to this announcement, we had some reporting from The Athletic and from Yahoo/The Hockey News that things are changing with how expansion is going to work. Now, before we go into that, Rachel, let's start with you and I were boots on the ground. We talked about this last week, but a little over a week ago now, almost 2 weeks now, we were at exit interviews for the New York Sirens. And we were there talking to Pascal Daou, who in that moment had no idea. Greg Fargo had no idea. All of the players we talked to had no idea what expansion would look like. A little over a week after we go to those exit interviews, we get the reports, not yet confirmed by the PWHL itself, that we're not going to have expansion. Instead, it's going to be a 5-phase signing window, which will include free agents of all kinds. And we'll get into that. Not language that the league is using, but I'm going to use it because I got to get my mind around everything that all the information we got, but also would include, I think, right, any players that would come through an expansion draft, or there won't be an expansion draft. It's just going to be these 5 phases. So the expansion teams, plural, who knows, still to be determined. Detroit and the 8 other teams, as of now, will have these 5 phases in which they can sign players. So expansion teams, of course, will, I guess, kind of lead off the signing window. But there are a lot of things that are changing here. And I'm trying to decide, is this better for the players? Is it better for the organizations? Like, I'm not sure. And I think that's because I'm also still a little confused, Rachel.
Yeah, we should also mention that they did announce that the entry draft is going to be June 16th
yes.
and 17th. Well, and the awards in Detroit.
This
this was part of the announcement. So this will also be part of this whole process when all is said and done. And
right, correct. Yes, thank you.
But I think so that's a good way to integrate Detroit into all of this. But I think that, this process, I think, is exceedingly confusing. And, I do like the idea of giving some, players a little bit more ownership of where they go as far as,
right.
In signing contracts where they want to. But at a certain point, you also have to create some stability and consistency with these clubs, because if you're expanding rapidly the way this league are, like the players are going team hopping like crazy right now. And there's so much fan influx this season in particular following the Olympics.
Yes.
That people got attuned to the league, they hopped on board, they found their teams, even if they don't have a team in market, they found their favorite players. And people get that there's expansion happening, or they might jump ship for a team in their newly formed, expansion team in their city if that happens. But I think this process lends to more player hopping, and thus the brand and team loyalty and the player loyalty kind of suffers as a result.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because also I think the way that this is packaged and the memo that was received by the reporters that have put out this information came from a memo that came from the PWHL. I was like, let me get the acronym right. And that's interesting in and of itself, because I do think it's being packaged as it's a little bit more player autonomy. But when you and we'll talk about this in a little bit, because there will be 4-year contracts, which we haven't seen in the league before. But what does that mean if by the next season or multiple seasons after that, there's expansion again? So are the expansion rules and how expansion teams fill their roster going to change the next time there's an expansion team? Is this going to be sustainable? Because to your point, it's kind of being billed in one way, but just by the nature of how the league has been expanding, I don't know how it's going to, foster a little bit of that. But okay, let's talk about what we know, or at least what has been reported. So again, it's 5 different phases, and we'll follow along here with what's in the Athletic / the New York Times. So the first phase is player protection. And so existing franchises will protect 3 players from the expansion process, but there's a major change in that free agents were exempt last year, but this time around, franchises will need to sign top free agents to protect them from expansion. So that sentence already, Rachel, it makes my head hurt. So you're a free agent, but you have to be signed. What?
Yeah, I don't love that. I gotta say, it doesn't make sense relative to standard sports contracts that your rights expire on a certain date. So if you have an expansion process prior to that date, your rights are just automatically with the team that you are currently under contract with. Right. And so to say, oh, you have to re-sign a UFA into the next season in order to protect them, to me, that flies against the logic of how sports contracts work.
Yeah, and I think what I maybe would have preferred, or what I'm perhaps maybe just familiar with, is when you have an expansion draft. And again, there is not really an expansion draft in how this is being handled. It's kind of like a bundle, if you will, of free agency and expansion. But the way that you do that is that you do the expansion draft first, and then players who are UFAs, for the purposes of the expansion draft, they are considered a part of the last team that they played for, right?
Yeah.
Thus, it doesn't require what we're talking about, that you have to re-sign a UFA, because there might be good reason that a player wants to explore free agency. But if a team perhaps kind of wants to keep them around, that I don't know. And again, maybe it's very possible that I'm missing things, because there's a lot here. But I guess that's the crux for me, is that are you really a free agent? And how do we feel about that? So that's what's happening in the first phase. It's about protecting players, and then also that if a team wants to protect someone that would be considered an unrestricted free agent, they would have to sign them first. So, I think that's really interesting, especially because we just had a WNBA expansion and they changed up things a little bit there, where if you are a free agent, an unrestricted free agent that's selected by an expansion team, we had 2 expansion teams this past quote unquote off season, but then the player still has autonomy, and there is some of that built into other phases, but again, it's not as streamlined, at least for me, as I would like it to be. But let's move on to phase number 2 and do our best to work this through. So in this phase, there are 2 different exclusive negotiating target lists, also what I would consider, Rachel, restricted free agents, perhaps, in a sense. That's a term I'm more familiar with. But in this phase, you've got teams can create a list of 20 players who are either on expiring contracts or left unprotected in the expansion draft. Okay.
They keep using the term expansion draft when there isn't one.
That's why I'm
but
like,
that's
what?
okay.
Right.
Let's just
like,
take
so
that and move on.
Is there an expansion draft, or is there isn't? What? See, I can't even speak. There's too many words. I'm getting confused. This is why I just want to anchor the conversation in. This is what has been reported, not what has been officially announced by the league. And I also just want to add this tidbit. I don't know if you picked up on it, but Amy Shearer said, we listen to the fans and the fans are always right. I was like, ooh, gotta clip that for later, because that might become a thing. But maybe this is also, as I'm kind of thinking out loud, Rachel, like a way to test and tease if this even makes sense. Because I do think the PWHL has a history of doing that as well. But okay, we digress. We're just going based off of what is being reported. And again, we're using The Athletic for this conversation. So expansion franchise offer, which is an EFO, comes with a minimum salary of $100,000 or the player's 2025-26 salary. So already, Rachel, that's indicating to me that if we go back to the inaugural season, this is really like the top tier players, right? This is like the 3 or 4 players that we've seen announced as the first players for each franchise over the years.
Right. And like when the league first started, they had 3 foundational players, and that's what this is.
Right. Because at that tag, like, that's not the median for salaries in the PWHL right now. So, okay. So minimum salary of $100K or whatever the player made in 2025-26. The player who is signed for multiple years will receive a $20,000 signing bonus. Players, though, get to determine, I skipped over this little bullet in our notes. Players who are offered an expansion franchise offer or an EFO, they get to determine the length of their contracts. Now, this is something interesting, and we've even had rookie contracts that have only been 1 year, and we were like, what's going on there? Why is this only a 1-year deal? We talked about Marie-Philippe Poulin and, some of the details there. So this is interesting to me, and I wonder how players are going to utilize this in phase 2, with them being able to suss out with this expansion, with this exclusive negotiating rights, or the expansion franchise offer, which is being compared to a franchise tag that you see in the WNBA or in men's football. Okay, but there's another tier in this phase 2, which is also considered a foundational player offer, or an EPO. Now, a player that is given this contract, or is offered this EPO contract, is not required to sign with the expansion franchise that offers it. If the player rejects the offer, that player must sign a new contract by phase 3. We'll get to that. This is at least a 2-year term. And again, you can see that the money also it's worth $80K in year 1 and $82,500 in year 2. This to me sounds more like a restricted free agent contract.
Yeah. I do want to point out, in the EFO side of things, the contract length could be 1 to 4 years. And
1 to 4, yes.
Yeah. And to this date, we've only had 3-year contracts as the max.
Yes.
So that is a change that is important to know.
Yes, and thank you for circling back to that. I think we had mentioned it, but it's yes, exactly. That's something that's changed, and comparative to the foundational player offer, which is this FPO. This is a 2-year contract, and you can see these are the prices here.
Yeah.
Exactly. So changes there, like you said. But again, you're offering 4-year. Well, I guess if you're under a contract, then at least I think how I understand expansion, then a player with those 4-year contracts would not be eligible, or I guess could be protected. I don't know. Like I said, I'm still confused. So if I say something wrong, please do blast me in the comments, because I'm honestly, I've read this multiple times and I'm still confused. So,
yeah.
All right.
and obviously the difference is, it seems like with this EFO, the player can't, if they're unprotected, they can't reject the offer from the expansion team. But if it's a foundational player offer, then they can reject the offer from the expansion team. And that's the big difference too. So that's where it gives the players more control over what they're doing if it's a foundational player offer, this, with the latter version of it.
Right. So, okay, again, this is, as far as we know, at least this is, what is proposed, not what is set in stone. But let's move on to phase 3. Now, this is a phase where all current franchises, so all 8 of them, can protect or sign 3 or more players. So the first 2 phases is really just talking about expansion teams, from my knowledge, from what I understand, Rachel. Once we get to phase 3, and this was mentioned earlier, anyone who rejects an expansion offer. So right now, that would just be Detroit, as far as we know. But then they would have to sign. If you get an offer in phase 1 or 2 and you reject it, you don't want to go to an expansion team, then phase 3 is where you have to sign. So all of the existing teams can protect or sign 3 or more players, for a total of 6 throughout the process. Players on expiring contracts can sign with any team in phase 3, not just their current roster. So again, this is a little bit of UFA, RFA mix, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, and it feels like this phase is similar to what they did last year with that free agency period.
Yes.
That people could sign anywhere, the unprotected players in that initial free agency phase before the general free agency phase. That's what phase 3 is.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Okay, so expansion teams can also sign, so AKA Detroit and whoever else perhaps, can also sign up to 3 additional players on expiring deals during this phase. Any player, and I just mentioned this, but I'm going to read it again. Any player who rejected the foundational player offer, the FPO, in phase 2 must sign at an average annual value of no lower than 90% of the FPO base salary. So I think what we're getting at here, and again, it's something that we've seen in WNBA expansion. If you take the expansion offer, it's a little different, but I'm just going to try and simplify that. If you're selected by an expansion team and you accept that offer, you're able to make the most amount of money that's available for these contracts. That's the same thing that we're seeing in the PWHL. If the player, and I don't know how I feel about this now that I'm talking about it out loud, Rachel, but if you as a player exercise autonomy to not accept specifically an expansion offer, then you effectively are diminishing the amount of money you can make in the upcoming season by way of foregoing that first offer.
I mean, I think that yes and no. It just means there's a floor on the salary that you have to sign for. So if you're rejecting the max, let's just say it's a max style offer from an expansion team, then if you're signing with, say, your existing team or a third team, there is a floor to the salary that you have to sign for. And so teams have to be willing to pay that. And it could be at a lower salary, but it could be the same salary too. It could match. It's just a matter of what the team and the player decide and what they negotiate. But there is a 90% floor, which is good for the player if they want to take a slight pay cut to stay where they are or to go to a third city.
Right. And I think also this is likely considering the fact that expansion teams clean salary cap sheet, right?
Right.
And so the reason that they're picking in those phases is so that they can build around what will be, again, those foundational
core players
and cord players. Exactly. So if you're not at that, then, again, I see the way that you're bringing it up as well. I just am like, okay, but 90% isn't 100. So for me, that's like money off the table. And I'm like, I don't know how I feel about that, but I get where you're coming from. See, this is why it's good to talk it through. Okay. All right. Phase 4. This is where expansion teams will sign players until they reach 10. Any player not protected or signed in these first 3 phases can sign with an expansion franchise, but expansion franchises cannot sign players who were previously on their exclusive negotiation target list from phase 2. Okay, so let's hop back up to phase 2 because I think I kind of skimmed over this, if I'm being honest, a little bit. Okay. The target exclusive negotiating target list is each list will include 20 players who are either on expiring contracts or were left unprotected in the draft. So that's where in the next phase here in phase 4, that's where, again, there are some limitations specifically on what expansion teams can do. So expansion teams can't then, Rachel, go back to that list of 20 if they weren't able to get it done in the first 2 specifically, but, the phases ahead of phase 4.
Right. And that just, I think, protects the existing teams, right? And gives them kind of first dibs on those target list players who don't get signed, which I think is the right approach, to be honest.
Right, exactly. Now, should an expansion team be unable to reach, they can, there will be a process, but the details of that process have not yet been announced. Well, officially, none of this has been announced, but there didn't seem like in what was, this is Haley Salvian's reporting, what Haley was able to see, that wasn't outlined as detailed as other things were.
Right. And I think this is because we don't have exact information on the number of teams in expansion.
Right, exactly.
And so we don't know how many slots there are. And if they can't reach 10 players, it could be because there's 4 teams and that's hard to fill all those slots, right? With existing players and without having considered, your new European free agents, new North American free agents, and the draft.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so then we go into phase 5. Pending free agents can re-sign with their current team, or they can wait for the June 19th signing window. Now, this is interesting because if the signing window is June 19th, then that tells me, Rachel, that all of these other phases, I'm assuming, are happening before June 19th. And probably, even before the 16th and 17th, which is when we're going to see the entry. It has to. So today is May 6th. They were recording on May 6th. And that's interesting. That's interesting to me.
That is a very fast turnaround here. But yeah, all of this process. So any additional expansion announcements and solidifying this process and this entire 5-phase process, well, except for phase 5, right, will have to take place prior to the entry draft. And then true free agency will happen after the entry draft because we'll have undrafted players who may want to be considered as free agents and all of that. And that's the free agency period.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So if you're confused,
that's a lot.
If you're confused, so am I. Did my best, and Rachel was here to fill in any holes that I particularly had. Because, like I said, I'll be honest, I'm still not sure that I understand. I also think, in fairness, Rachel, I as someone who covers the WNBA, I kind of just went through this, and I feel like the phrasing and the terminology I'm trying to fit in my brain as a shortcut to what I had to learn inside out, and it's not exactly the same. This is a different formula, it's a different format, and it's not really, I think, what you and I are familiar with from covering the NHL either. So there's definitely some innovation here. It's going to take some time, but also Detroit was just announced today. We don't know if between now, May 6th, and June, whatever, there's going to be another expansion team announced, because again, some of the reporting that we had heard is that it could be more than one expansion team this year. So we've got a lot to figure out. We'll do our best to keep you updated, but I don't think we're alone when it comes to being a little bit confused with how everything is going down. But what we're not confused about, Rachel, is that we are getting fantastic playoff hockey. And both series, in case you missed it, are tied. Sorry, spoiler alert, but we're going to recap those games. Let's start with the series as of our last episode, Rachel, that had not kicked off yet. And that is Montreal selecting Minnesota in the semifinal. Montreal was the top team in the PWHL. When you're the top dog, you get to pick your opponent in the 4-team playoffs that starts at effectively the semifinals. 5-game series. We've talked about that before. We talked about why Montreal probably picked Minnesota. The devil you know, right? That was your phrase from last episode, Rachel. And well, we thought it would be a high-scoring affair, and it certainly was in game 1, but it got a lot tighter. And I mean a lot tighter in what's technically considered game 2, but basically was also game 3, Rachel.
Listen, these playoffs have been very good so far, and this whole Montreal Minnesota series is absolutely like we're getting what we asked for here.
100%.
In terms of, well, except for one key part, which we're going to talk about.
We are definitely going to talk about that. We have a whole section for that, so we're just going to talk about X's and O's for now.
Yeah.
And we'll probably mention what happened, but we'll do a deeper dive. But spoiler alert, or we'll get into it, but yes, we're talking about expansions. What? We're talking about suspensions. We already talked about expansion, and we will also be talking about fines. Okay, there we go. Got my words together. Montreal takes game 2 in a triple OT.
Oh my goodness.
Decided by game. 1 goal, as in there was only 1 goal in the entire game.
I know.
What a game. 2 teams went into the first overtime with shots on goal even after regulation. By the time it was all said and done, Rachel, Montreal outshot Minnesota. I think it's 25. I think post-game they said 24, but anywhere from 24 to 25 shots to 11 in overtime.
Yeah, wow. And I know. And you gotta give a lot of credit to Maddie Rooney. I know she was on the losing side of this game, but a career high 51 saves in the game. Absolute Herculean effort. The way that Montreal was just peppering her and Minnesota with shots in the entirety of the overtimes, across the board, especially I would say in that second overtime, it was just super intense. So I do want to give her a ton of credit in that game.
Yeah, I mean, again, the goaltending has been phenomenal here. Obviously, and Renee Debien also under fire here. More so, again, keeping even with what we saw from Rooney in regulation, and then Montreal really churning it up. And wouldn't you know, I think I said earlier or often, death, taxes, MPP. Marie-Philippe Poulin gets a goal in overtime. Shocker.
I know, right? From her knees, no less.
Right. One-time shot, fed by Stacy, cross ice, game over.
Listen, well, and then, Laura Stacey getting the hat trick in a loss, which is the worst.
I know.
Just the worst in game 1. Like when that happens, you're like, oh, I want to celebrate your hat trick. But that was the first, playoff hat trick in PWHL history, and in a very high scoring game, unlike the second game. And so just 2 completely different games with, our favorite hockey wives contributing to both there, and love that for them. But yeah, just a tremendous series so far between these 2 teams.
It's been phenomenal. So again, so it was 3 overtimes in game 2. Montreal takes it. an overtime also, though, in game one, that was a 5-4 affair. So 10 goals already through 2 games between these two teams. And I think game one is what we expected, right? Specifically from this series, we said, with all due respect to the phenomenal Olympic gold medal winning goaltenders that we have in this series, it could be just a free-for-all when it comes to scoring. And we saw a little bit of that in game one. Things tightened up in game two. So it very different, but I kind of like that we're getting different games in these two series. A high scoring affair. Like you said, Laura Stacey, 3 of those 4 goals in a loss for Montreal off of the stick of Laura Stacey. You know, when you look at Minnesota, some of the usual suspects getting involved here. I loved to see also, very selfishly, Cheyenne Darkangelo get on the board as well for Montreal in that first game. We saw Katie Knoll score for Minnesota, as well as Grace Zumwinkle. And then Jinsey Rose gets the game winner in overtime. Love that. Kelly Panic had a two-point night. Abby Rock, Marie-Philippe Poulin. I mean, I could literally go on and on. There were a lot of people that scored two points. I was like, I'm not going to list them all. Check out the box score. But very interesting series here. And again, we are going to talk about, there was a big difference specifically for Minnesota between game one and game two. Rachel, we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but let's go to the other series, also tied up at 1 game apiece going into game three, and that is Ottawa getting on the board, being able to take down Boston in game two before the series heads to Canada. So it was a 3-1 victory here. You know, what were some of the things that you think were the difference for the Charge in game two and getting the win?
Yeah, I think they were just more consistent throughout the game.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, they got the early goals first off in that second game, right? And, you know, the third goal was an empty netter. So for all intents and purposes, you could say that the scores were the same in the 2 games, but Ottawa gets on the board first in the second game, and were able to hold on. Of course, you know, they get great goaltending, as they usually do. But I think that, yeah, it was really just, let's get on the board early and then let's hunker down. And it was the right strategy, and it worked for them.
Yeah, 100%. And that's what we talked about, right? When you and I talked about, when we previewed this series, that's what we felt Ottawa was going to need here. We do know that there was a hit, and we talked about that game misconduct, 5-minute major. There was a suspension. We added that post-production. So for those who watched or listened to last week's episode, you got to see the explanation of the suspension and things of that nature. So there was a suspension, Rachel, in the PWHL postseason. And you know what? Again, when you have a hit to the head, not surprising. But it wouldn't be the only suspension that we saw, Rachel. But before we get into that, honestly, before we do that, because I don't want to overlook another phenomenal goaltending performance. And that's by the one and only Gwyneth Philips.
Yeah. I mean, again, like, you look at in that first game, you know, Boston is 10 shots higher than Ottawa. And that's a huge game you have for Gwyneth Philips, even though they wound up losing the game, right? But
yeah,
it's lopsided in that way. And then, you know, in the second game, again, 10-shot difference, but it was even higher for Boston that time. And Gwyneth Phillips made some absolutely phenomenal saves in that second game. I would say, you know, I mean, she's heroic in every game, let's be real, but like huge stops in that second game to hold the lead for Ottawa.
Yes. 5th time she's recorded 30 or more stops in 10 playoff games. It's her 5th career playoff win, and the first in regulation in the postseason since game 4 in 2025. So yeah, Gwyneth Phillips we talked about it, right? It just seemed like it was a no-brainer to keep Phillips after that performance. It's just such a great story because she was the second option for that Ottawa Charge team. And we've talked about it before, right? You have to, especially for a team that was able to like slink their way into the playoffs last season and this year, quite honestly, but specifically last year, Phillips is the queen there. I loved her quote after when she was asked about her save performance. I mean, that's my job, right? Make the saves. My defenders did a great job today helping me clear sight lines and getting the pucks out. I know when it's kind of late in the third, I just spin around rebounds right up the slot, and Brienne Jenner just swatted at it. I was giving her kudos. We've been working well together, and everyone's been helping me out. We all have our jobs to do, and that's fine. I mean, I love that she's also like, I mean, this is what I do. Like, I'm a goaltender. That's what I do. But also in that saying, like, Brienne Jenner, who's their captain, who we've talked about before, Ottawa usually wins when Jenner scores, is also helping out clean up pucks on defense. And that goes back to what you said, right? As we got into this series, it's about that consistency and about really being proactive, playing the kind of game that Ottawa needs to play. It's just that sometimes they're an inconsistent team. They're consistently inconsistent, is what I like to say, lovingly so. But they're starting to get things together. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be hard fought. They really need great performances from Gwyneth Philips. But the good thing is that Phillips is up to the task.
Right. No, absolutely.
Yep. But good to see them get a little cushion, I should say, right, in that win. It wasn't a 1-goal game for like the first time in forever. Like, they don't really do that very often, but it was good to see them have a little cushion here. Okay, so we're going to get into the schedule for the rest of the playoffs, including a back-to-back. Oh my gosh, Rachel. After having game 1 and game 2 go into overtime, game 2 go to a triple overtime. The next time Minnesota and Montreal hit the ice in the great state of Minnesota, they have back-to-back games. I really hope rest and recovery is on point for these teams, but we're going to break down the whole schedule. But we have to talk about what happened in game 1 of that series. Again, that game concluded after our last episode. I said death taxes MPP. It's getting to a point where it kind of feels like death taxes Britta Curl in a conversation about hits that go too far.
Yeah. Now, this is absolutely brutal because there were 2 incidents in that game, right? Yes. And so there was an incident where there was the check to the head, which was the more, obvious situation that was going to require a look at it, where Caitlin Willoughby got checked to the head, and it was a very deliberate, like very deliberate. But there was an earlier incident where she pulled Abby Rock's face mask and it pulled her down to the ice. So the thing about this that's infuriating is they had one combined supplemental discipline for the 2 incidents, and they gave a fine for the face mask incident of $250, which, as we've said, means nothing truly, and a 1-game suspension for the head hit, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because when I was reading, I was like, oh, okay, here comes the email. And I'm reading the email and I was like, wait, they led with the Rock, the Rock. They led with the Abby Rock incident in the email. And I was like, okay, wait, I'm so confused. Is that what she got suspended? Like, I was so confused. But yeah, like there were 2 things that happened here. Like you said, from the player safety committee, this is what we heard. Again, Britta Curl-Salemi suspended 1 game and fined $250 following 2 separate incidents. The fine is a result of the actions in the altercation in the second period, where she and opponent Abby Rock were assessed minor penalties. So again, that's there. But I'm reading it quickly and I'm like, wait, what? But the suspension, as it says later, is a result of the major penalty and game misconduct assessed to Curl-Salemi for an illegal check to the head on opponent Caitlin Willoughby at 9:12 of the second period. Now, this is where I also want to stop, pause for the cause, because again, we added it post-production, but what we've known is that the player safety committee, Rachel, to your point, perhaps about just this game, let alone what's happened in the last handful of seasons, they do take prior history into account. And 250, not a lot. Like you said, we've talked about that. But a player that's getting a fine and a game misconduct in the same game, like at what point do we just kind of say, again, is 250 enough? Is one game suspension enough? Because we have seen a multiple game suspension. We saw that earlier this season.
Yeah, and I think that this whole reset, that she hadn't gotten suspended this season, so the repeat offender thing gets reduced, like it's some sort of driver's license speeding ticket thing, which is
Right.
ridiculous because she's gotten 3 separate one-game suspensions in the prior season. And the fact that that is not taken into consideration for her to get a multi-game suspension at this point is absolutely ludicrous. And 99 out of 100 people would agree with you on that.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, yeah, so was it enough? Honestly, it just doesn't feel like it was. And, you know, we talked about this specifically. You mentioned, like, okay, it's the playoffs. Like, I think we can all agree that if we can keep elite level players in the playoffs on the ice, we want to do that. But you know what you got to do in order to make that happen is make sure that elite level players are not getting their head bashed in by bad hits. So there were 2 hits in 2 different games that was above the shoulder. We know hockey at all levels is trying to take that out of the game. So you know what? Yes, I would love to see no suspensions and don't hit people above the shoulders, period. So there's that. But then it's like, okay, how do you protect now, or how are you enforcing things beyond? And I do know that there is a sect of the women's hockey community that don't feel that Britta Curls-Salemi should be under a microscope for these hits. There's also a group that absolutely thinks that she does. But again, like, it's just like, fool me once, fool me twice, whatever that phrase is. Like, how many times do we have to have proof and evidence that Britta Curl either doesn't know or doesn't care about the line?
Yeah, well, and she would probably say, well, I got open ice checked earlier. But so if you're going to retaliate, you retaliate with a shoulder check and let the chips fall where they may, right? Because she got shoulder checked down in the open ice. And I don't think that was a penalty, to be honest.
It wasn't.
Because of the nature.
It's a heavy hockey hit.
It was a heavy hockey hit that was in the run of play. And so, you know, I think if she wants to make that argument, she can. But I think when you're retaliating for that because you're pissed off about it, you can do that with throwing a shoulder. You absolutely can. And she absolutely targeted the head. So that excuse to me is out the window.
Right.
When you target the head.
You know, again, you look at the video, it's talking about, was she under control? Could she have avoided that hit? But then you bring up an excellent point about retaliation. I mean, that's also on the table, right? When it comes to assessing and evaluating suspensions, you know, not only could this was the player in control, but did this player actively go to make this hit? And again, we've seen that people, I'm thinking of Aneta Taralova, right? In particular, that had probably a retaliatory hit and, you know, had a suspension for that. So I don't know. I think that it's just getting exhausting, quite honestly, to talk about a player and continually have these on ice things be cause for concern. Huge concern.
I agree. And it's not a heat of the moment thing because the retaliatory hit that was predatory happened, you know, in the next sequence. It's not like at the exact same time. So like you can't even make that excuse either. But, you know, you can say, did Minnesota miss her in game 2? Maybe, but they get her back for game 3. And, you know, we'll see how that goes Thursday night, right?
Yeah. Game 3 at home. And, you know, assuming everything stays on the up and up for game 4, which is the very next night. So having a rested body come back into the fold for game 3 and for game 4, that's huge also, you know, in theory, right, Rachel? So again, I don't really.
Minnesota is 4-0 all time in game 3s in the playoffs. So
yeah, so we've all right.
Into that what you will.
Let's do it. All right, it's time to go over the schedule. We've already alluded to it, but we have the remaining schedule here. Have been some changes, we know, just to arenas and some times and things of that nature. But Thursday, May 7th, Game 3, Montreal at Minnesota, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. But really, I should have led with 6 p.m. Central because the game will be played Central Time. Like you mentioned, Minnesota 4-0 in Game 3s. Can Montreal break that streak? Friday, May 8th, Montreal at Minnesota. Once again, this is at Grand Casino Arena. It's 7:30 p.m. Central Time. But there is another game on that day. Of course, 2 games in the PWHL, also during WNBA tip-off. I say that tongue-in-cheek. I mean, the schedule, the sports schedule is the sports schedule. I just like whining a little bit every once in a while. But Game 3 between Boston and Ottawa at Canadian Tire Center, Rachel. 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And what I will say is I'm pretty excited for both of these series to switch, because I do think that the particular fan bases and how they've been able to build up culture both in the Twin Cities, but also in Ottawa, and Ottawa now having a larger barn to cheer in. Oof, I think atmosphere is going to be electric for the Game 3s.
Yeah, in Ottawa in particular, because first off, thank you, Ottawa Senators, for losing so that the Charge can have the building.
Right.
And they repainted the ice so that the Charge logo is at the center instead of the Senators logo.
Love
and
it,
I love that. And we have, with this whole arena drama going on in the background with a potential smaller arena for Ottawa, this is going to show why they deserve a bigger building. So I love all of that. For
all
this.
of the
but
things.
I'm excited for these next few games for sure.
All of the things. Okay, so I think we can safely pick our game of the week, because we do have some games on the line here. We do know we're going to at least Game 4 in both series. But speaking of Game 4, we already mentioned Friday, May 8th is Game 4, Montreal at Minnesota. Game 4, Boston at Ottawa on Sunday, May 10th. That's at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And then if necessary, we get Game 5s on Monday, May 11th at Place Belle, 7 p.m. Minnesota at Montreal, and Tuesday, Ottawa at Boston at the Zongus Center at 7 p.m. All right, let's talk about the games that we know are going to happen for sure. So anything up to a Game 4, Rachel, what are you picking as your game to watch?
I mean, I can't choose. I literally can't choose between the games in this series at all. I think both are really great. So I'm not going to. I'm just going to say watch all of it.
I love that. And I respect your right to not choose. There you go. See, we can do it in sports. There you go. For my money, though, thinking about the back-to-back, I'm actually going to say Game 4 of the Montreal-Minnesota series, because I'm very curious to see if and how back-to-backs impact either team. And then, of course, the team that's able to win there, will that be a clincher? Will it force a Game 5? So for me, the back-to-back nature, I think, just adds a little more drama that I'm very curious to see how it plays out. So that's probably my pick. And I'm with you. These are great series. We've seen phenomenal hockey. We've seen phenomenal goaltending. And we're just going to have to stay tuned for more. So there you have it, folks. We gave you expansion, what we know about the new kind of not really expansion draft, but kind of hybrid free agent window. We talked about that Detroit is the newest expansion team and will host the entry draft. And of course, we got you up to date on the 2 series happening. We're still in the semifinals, folks. Whoever survives will advance to the Walter Cup final. Will it be Minnesota? Will they get a third crack at the Walter Cup? Or will it be Montreal? Haven't made it to a final yet. Always a bridesmaid, looking to be a bride proper this year. And then there's Ottawa. They were the darling Cinderella story on the back of the finals MVP of Gwyneth Philips, but they're taking on a Boston team that wants to exercise some demons of their own. So either way, you gotta tune in, and we will have you covered right here at Even Strength as part of Black Rosie Media. Until next episode, enjoy the games, and we will catch you at some point in between the next series. All right. Take care, everybody.